Hello, everybody, and welcome to Versus, brought to you by the Art Fight Podcast. Every week on Versus, we match up one fighter and one artist from the past or the present in a winner-take-all three-round battle. In the first round, we'll introduce our fighter. In the second round, we'll introduce our artist. And in the third round, we'll reveal our scorecards and declare our winner. I am Joe Nolan. I'm here with my co-host, Brian Siskind. Let the battle begin. This week, one of the most creative fighters in mixed martial arts, El Kukui himself, Tony Ferguson, faces off against the interplanetary emissary of cosmic jazz, Sun Ra. Brian, I can't wait for this fight.
Well, let me just tell you, I first of all know that I will never be able to match your energy, and I really appreciate it. Also,
that's how I win, Brian.
Your rap that you have preceding Sun Ra's description is unbelievable. I love that. And let me say too that to the audience here that when we were talking about who was going to sort of be taking who, are you taking Ferguson? Am I taking Ferguson? Or are you going to do Sun Ra on this one? I initially thought that I would go Sun Ra because I feel like I'm more music and you're probably, Joe, a little bit more fight knowledgeable than I am. But I realized I was wrong. You are actually far more Sun Ra knowledgeable than I will ever be in my entire life. And I thought that I was a lifelong student. You just sort of casually, here's like 7 articles, deep, sort of rich prose that I've written in all points of analysis of Sun Ra. So I feel like that I'm just sort of the other foot in this one. I'll be the sort of sandbagger. But I am very excited, and I think that this is a great comparison that we're doing because it's the first time where I think we've really been able to get 2 figures that I consider to be of such likeness or similarity. So I think
yeah,
cool.
I mean, it's really weird because I really think that both these guys are incredibly unique, and I think that if you were going to pair up as the only 2 people who are crazy enough to think people should be engaging in an activity like this, if you were going to pair Tony Ferguson up with anyone, really the only person in the creative universe perhaps is Sun Ra, is the only one who like really is. I mean, both these guys are, I think, unique is the word that I think is, to me, it's the most important thing going on here. Like, there's nobody like Tony Ferguson, and there's nobody like Sun Ra. And but Brian, there can only be one winner. So let's go ahead and start our fight for the week. Why don't you tell us about Tony Ferguson for all of our art friends out there who don't know about this guy, who is a creative genius of fistification?
Oh my gosh! So I mean. And this is the beauty of I think being a mixed martial arts sort of a fan, is because it's so hard to sort of encapsulate certain figures in this sport. It's and it's easier, maybe perhaps cliche to say somebody's beyond category or whatever, but Ferguson is truly beyond category. So the baseline here, folks, is that Tony Ferguson, El Kukui, as he's called, is a lightweight fighter fighting in 155. Class, which is, as we talked about last week with our bout with Barbosa versus George Bellows, 155 is the hardest probably place to be. And Ferguson has been fighting in this class for 11 or 8 was it 8 years? Was it 2012? Anyway, a long time. He's 25-4. He's only had 5 decisions. Somebody's gotten hurt pretty much every time. And, he's been on a legendary 12-fight win streak that just got broken. But in a way, it's been sort of interesting because we can now see sort of he's not riding that wave anymore. So how does he deal with that? And he's already proven himself to be very interesting. But anyway, you should know about his fighting style that it's incredibly artistic. It's incredibly creative. It's self-indulgent. It is his style is not. Trent Reinsmith wrote a great piece about Tony Ferguson and essentially said, that it's not, his style is not flowy in that sort of paradigm. It's more like he's just so artful in his clear reactions to everything that's happening in front of him or around him. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's a fine line. He's had, issues, right, mentally, and maybe some things going on with him that are, a little bit left of field. But generally, he's just been the hardest worker that you've ever seen. And the last thing I just want to throw in there is just that, without getting into more of his fighting style, he has a way of capturing audiences and absolute attention because of just his violence, his elbows, his ruthlessness, his sheer toughness, and you don't know which way he's going to move or how he's going to move, and you know that someone's going to get hit with an elbow generally, and it's going to be of a slicing kind of variety. So without getting too violent about it, I mean, it's really something to see. So generally, I think that both Sun Ra and Ferguson are also similar in like this idea that they're sort of mystics, and they're perhaps misunderstood by their peers by and large. Both also have a deep, I think, respect for like mysticism, numerology, symbols, ancient rites.
Alchemy.
There's this undercurrent of not like one spirituality, but like a strange intersection of a lot of different things. In the same way that you can tell us about now with Sun Ra, in terms of, on one hand he's speaking to black nationalists, and on the other he's speaking to a totally different audience, and he somehow could do all that. So maybe tell us about Sun Ra to the uninitiated before we get into it.
Yeah, well, I think one of the, outside of what we were just talking about, the idea that these guys are both just very unique people in the creative worlds they roam in, and therefore are very much alike in their uniqueness, if that's something we could point at. I think one of the most interesting sort of continuities between them both, and this sort of alludes to what you were saying about Tony's fighting style, is there's something improvisational about what Tony's doing. There's like, he's not flowy the way like a kung fu wushu artist is, when every move goes into another move and it's just this beautiful physical expression. He has moments like that, especially in his rolling and things, which is like, this outrageous sort of movement in the ring that he'll do that nobody else will even think about doing. But Tony's thing is can sometimes seem more awkward than that, because it really is moment to moment. Just, the next thing that's going to happen, it could be anything. Even for him, he has no idea. It depends. Maybe this, maybe that. I don't know. I'm going to react, and that's what it's going to be. And that's very much the way jazz musicians will behave when they're playing in an ensemble and they're improvising. It's really what I'm going to play next depends on what you're going to play next and what he's going to play next, and nobody knows what's coming next until it happens, and then we're reacting again, and that's the way that works. So I feel like there's this improvisational quality to both these guys. We celebrated the centenary of Sun Ra back in 2014. So he was born in 1914. So this is a guy who's almost back in the 19th century. He's barely even part of the 20th century, and yet
unbelievable.
I know, it's insane, because as a musician and as a composer and as a band leader, this guy's forward-thinking vision is still beyond many people. I mean, he's still so far out there. It's insane that this guy was already 30 by the time World War II came around, right? He's really an incredible guy. His birthday was May 22nd, by the way, so we're almost celebrating his birthday. And Sun Ra was somebody, like you said, his aesthetic sort of involved like Afrofuturism and a lot of things that had to do with like black nationalism, all this stuff, by the time his music was becoming popular in the 60s and things like this. But also always had this cosmic element to it, and always had this forward thinking thing going on. So you mentioned that I had written all these articles for my blog back in the day. It's, for some reason, every time it would come around to Christmas time or something, there's this one Christmas single that Sun Ra and the Orchestra, which was the name of his band, had released. And so it just became this Christmas tradition where I talk about Sun Ra almost every year. So I found in one of these articles, they sort of I was quoting a different article in my blog post, but it said it just talks about like some of the ground that this guy from 1914, born in 1914, and this is the kind of things he was doing, was that he here we go. On the other hand, Sun Ra was the first jazz musician to perform on electronic keyboards. He was the first to pursue full-scale collective improvisation in a big band setting, and his preoccupation with space travel as a compositional subject predated bands like Weather Report by 15 years, like a decade and a half ahead of all those guys, So he's one of a kind. There's never been anything like him. There's a great book. I think the book called Space is the Place, I believe. And there's a great biography about Sun Ra there. If you go out there and find it, you can look for it. One of the most interesting things about Sun Ra too is that this band that he had was really organized like a communal living experiment. You know, all these guys were in the same house together. They lived together. They traveled together. They ate together. Being in the orchestra wasn't just about playing music in a band. It was about a way of life. And that way of life was like, had everything to do with, struggling to keep a band together in the mid-century as much as it did with the pyramids of Egypt and the paradise to come. I mean, it's a
right.
big picture. It's a big picture situation with Sun Ra, and these are all the reasons why we need somebody of this might and expanse to go up against Tony Ferguson.
Yeah, and before we jump to the first round, too, I just want to say that one of the things I appreciate about both of these sort of figures in this kind of comparative sense is that they both, I mean, a lot of fighters, I would say, have this, and you could say probably a lot of artists have this, but these two figures had a very unique and very concentrated sort of feeling of it's me against the world, and I'm going to wield myself through the world in exactly unapologetically the way that I feel, and I'm not going to hedge. I'm not going to soften any corners of anything. I'm just going to be an unapologetic, pure assertion of my craft,
Right.
And I think that's, like I said, that can be very much a cliche sometimes, but I think in the case of these two, it really is the case. So what's next? We do the first round. We get into this, right?
Yeah, here we go. Yeah.
All right.
So
Tell
first
the rules.
we're going to compare these guys. This is basically a rule set that we borrowed from the UFC rule set, sort of tweaked it a little bit so that it could fit both these guys as artists, not necessarily just the fighter. And we're going to judge their effective use of creative tools, their effective aggression, and their art era control. So let's go ahead and start with the effective use of creative tools. Brian, you and I will both be judging each of these categories using a 10-point must system. So I don't see any 10-8 rounds in this one, by the way. This is a very close fight.
It's also quite rigged if you think about it. We just set this up to then judge ourselves. But yes, there is no objectivity here on the Art Fight podcast. All right, so we're first getting into effective use of creative tools, right?
Yeah.
All right, so I'll go first with Tony. So everyone who's ever seen Tony Ferguson fight remembers that they saw him fight. That's not an easy thing to accomplish. You can be one of those fighters that is memorable, but Tony can do it in a way where even in the rare cases where he's lost, it burns into your consciousness. So what is it about that, right? And it's really about his spontaneity and his maneuvers, right? His evasive maneuvers and his tumbling and his capoeira and breakdancing all combined to be this sort of unpredictable electric kind of force upon like where anything can happen at any time, and you can tell that he's brought so much into his tool set. I mean, the guy is obviously kicking poles, and we could go for, you can find videos on YouTube of him, just his training, just excerpts of his trainings that go on for 30 minutes that are just constantly snapshots of different, what the hell is he doing right now? Centrifuge of tires and whacking himself in the legs and
any number of activities performed on a balance ball.
Yes, exactly, and the spinning weights, and he's like a human. He's trying to become like a human gyroscope or something. So there's no way I can explain that. We don't have the time to get into it here, but I think that in terms of creative tools, the guy's got creative tools. Now we're gonna go now to Sun Ra, but if Tony had a Moog synthesizer, strange shit would happen too. So
it would. I would love to see. It would be so fun to find out. I'm not aware of him being at all creative in the arts in any way, but man, I would love just to give him something. You know what I mean? And see what he could do with it. Because I would not be surprised if, like you said, if you gave him a synthesizer in an hour to twist some knobs, he would come up with some weird stuff. But who else would do that is Sun Ra. Sun Ra to me is like the thing that separates Sun Ra from the pack. I feel is that he was not only a piano player in his own right and a very advanced piano player, and like we're talking about, like somebody who was literally breaking down barriers and moving over to electronic keyboards before any of his peers were even thinking of that. Long before Miles Davis was doing anything like with
Prototype
electric.
recipient of the earliest synths. Yeah.
Yeah, as far ahead as you could
Yeah.
possibly be as an individual musician. But then he was also the composer. He was also the band leader. He was also the cosmologist, man. I mean, to me, there's no limit to what he was able to do in the small picture and in the big picture with these creative tools that he had. And I mean, there's almost nobody who's even in the category. I mean, I don't know if there is anybody in the category. George Clinton, kind of, but George Clinton is like a little bit more of a tongue-in-cheek sort of version, where Sun Ra is a true believer.
Yes.
So anyway, with that in mind, Brian, who wins the first round for you?
Well, I really think that you have to consider tools to be also the constructs through which you work. If Sun Ra being such a band leader and having instrumental prowess and charging his way through the business and the culture and the way that he did, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it's hard. I think it's very, very, very close. But I do feel that, I mean, it might be different. We have a huge age difference here. I mean, obviously Sun Ra died in the early '90s, but was he had a solid run. Perhaps Tony will outpace Sun Ra's creative tools down the road, but I think it takes a lifetime to do that. So because of that, I will cede 10-9 round to in the favor of Sun Ra.
Yeah, I have come to the same conclusion. So the first round goes to Sun Ra. I mean, what a mountain to try to climb, by the way. But a close round, nonetheless, a very close round within their respective fields. It's hard to find anyone who brings more creativity to their toolkit than somebody like Tony Ferguson. Now, this next category to me maybe leans a little bit in Ferguson's direction. The use of effective, I'm going to call it effective creative aggression, because I think that helps us kind of bridge the gap between the artist and the fighter more. But this is like about who's really bringing it, when it comes to their work, their career, their music, their whole thing. And we can't deny the fact that Tony Ferguson never fails to bring it.
I mean, I think that anyone who's won a fight with an up kick, right? I mean, just his toughness. I mean, this last fight that he lost, no shame in that at all. I mean, the only thing is that they probably should have stopped it, or his corner should have stopped it or something.
Yeah.
But
the only problem is he's so tough. They should have stopped the fight earlier, because he was never going to be stopped.
Yeah. So you hear people in the fight game all the time talking about sort of people being essentially a danger to themselves because they're just going to tough out anything.
Right.
And that's just sort of the underlying kind of, I think it almost takes that kind of lack of pragmatism or forethought to even be in the position of fighting. So it's hard for me to forgive people that just are still in that perpetual, like, I'm going to do this or I'm going to die kind of thing.
Right.
But anyway, in terms of effective creative aggression, I think that for Tony Ferguson, that encapsulates exactly what his game is: creative aggression. So if I'm, I don't know if we're doing like the back and forth here again, but basically, Tony Ferguson's toughness clearly defined in his last fight, but always been there. At the same time, like the weird, like he has a devastating knee injury and surgery, and comes back with in an absurd small, like 6 months or 5 months, whatever, something that would have us hobbled for years.
Yeah, he makes weight for fights he's not going to fight.
Yeah,
just his fights get canceled, and he still makes weight.
Yeah,
just because.
Yeah, I mean, so that tells you right there that that's somebody operating on their own set of standards. But yeah, so in terms of creative aggression, I'm saying Tony Ferguson because that's what he is.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. I feel like Sun Ra does have this very long career. Sun Ra really does seem to all these things I just mentioned, the way that the band lived communally, the way the band changed throughout time, like the way they adopted new styles and evolved in these interesting ways. It's like everything Sun Ra was trying to do was about sustainability, and he did sustain. And by the time he left this earthly plane, he's built this massive fucking body of work that any of our listeners now who've never heard of Sun Ra and the orchestra, you got the rest of your life to get through this stuff, man, because there's a lot to the Sun Ra thing. There's tons of stuff. So in a way, I think Sun Ra to me was somebody who was about building this large body of work over time. You know what I mean? But there wasn't an aggressive, intensity to what he did. It was specifically not that, really. I really feel like Sun Ra was really more interested in building something that would last. And I think he really did that, but that's a different kind of thing than what we're talking about when we're talking about effective creative aggression. So with that in mind, I have to agree with you. I think, you can't talk about creative aggression without talking about Tony Ferguson, and he's going to take our second round. 10-9 for me as well, Tony Ferguson.
Wow, so it's one apiece.
It is. We don't figure these out ahead of time, everybody. We're not just going through the motions here. This is all we never know what we're doing. Okay, so the last one it's the art era control. So who within their work as a fighter or an artist who grabbed some space and held it, and made people come to grips with them.
Wow. Well, so for me, like, I'm already thinking this is not going to bode well for Tony Ferguson this round and this criteria, because, I mean, and I can't imagine what this is like, though, to go on a 12 fight streak that lasts the better part of 8 years and to have it all gone. And MMA is so finicky. If you're an artist and you make a series of paintings people don't like, they're not going to just fully abandon you. It's just considered sort of part of your journey. Maybe they'll come back,
Right.
Music,
so Tony was on a 12-fight win streak, and just a few weeks ago lost a fight and broke that streak, just for people who aren't keeping up.
Yeah. So, and the only title that he ever actually held was interim, right? That's right. Yeah. So, as much as he had this standing run that he was on, some people can argue and look at who he fought over that run and say, he definitely fought some great fighters. He fought Donald Cerrone. He fought Anthony Pettis and destroyed them.
Yeah.
But he's also got, some fights that are with lesser fighters than that, and so maybe that contributed to his run. But I feel like that kind of weighs out with counterbalances, the insanity of him coming back from injuries and all the things that he's done to be there for it. And we haven't even begun to mention, and I think this is good, that he was scheduled to fight, probably one of the top 3 fighters to ever exist 5 times, and it never happened. So, with Khabib. So we're not even going to talk about that, because it's just we gotta move on. We have to collectively wish that fight goodbye. But in terms of art era control, I feel like, unfortunately in sports, for whatever reason, I think it's looked at differently than it is in art or creative worlds, because art can have this subjective resurgence, and 40 years posthumously something can become appreciated, or, there's a lot more malleability to sort of the, I think, era control mechanisms or possibilities for an artist or a creative, because you're just putting media into space. However, if you're looking at the last decade, Tony Ferguson's been right there, one of the top fighters for the better part of, what most people would consider modern MMA. That being said, he never really got there for circumstances, bad luck, and all the other things in between. He just never got there. So I'm already kind of handing this off. I'm not going to fight too hard, but I feel like this is going to go your way. But you tell me why. You tell us why.
Yeah. Well, I think you're onto something. I think you bring up an interesting point that a lot of it has to do with the way we see these two different things through these different lenses in combat sports. If we're going to talk about your art era control, the first thing I want to know is, when did you become the champ, and how long did you hold your championship?
Yeah.
And somebody like Tony, has been somebody who's just like slipped right past that brass ring, a number of times, no matter how many people he's beaten in the meantime, no matter how many, years he's been on a winning run, no matter how impossible that is for all the other fighters that are in his division, the hardest division that you could possibly be in. At the end of the day, you got to get that belt and you got to hold on to it. You know what I mean? And I think with Sun Ra, as I was talking about in the last category regarding effective aggression, I think it's exactly because he took this big picture, long haul sort of perspective that created this legacy for him. And even though Sun Ra wasn't the rock star that Miles Davis was, he wasn't the rock star that John Coltrane was, all these people who came up under him and after him, or his peers during that time, he was
Pharaoh.
Yeah, exactly. So he was always in there and able to keep it going, like I said. But really, at the end of the day, I really feel like his focus on creating this long-term sustained project is why now and for decades to come, we'll be looking back at Sun Ra as a one of a kind, one and only genius. When lots of these other people who might have had more hits or more number ones on the jazz chart and things like that, they won the Downbeat Award in 1965 or whatever. It's like that pales in comparison to what Sun Ra did in the long term.
Yeah.
So here I am again, Brian. I am right with you on this. And I'm going to say it's a 10-9 round again, a close round again. But at the end of the day, Sun Ra takes this round as well. And here we are with our score. We got Tony winning the first round, or Tony winning the second round, but Sun Ra taking the first and the third round. It's a unanimous decision, not a knockout, but a unanimous decision for Sun Ra over Tony Ferguson.
And really, I mean, if you're gonna lose to anyone in this feigned capacity that we have invented for our sole enjoyment,
right?
Yeah,
you should go listen to the Sun Ra album, Champ Shit Only.
That's so
Champ
good.
Shit.
Man, I was listening.
Champ shit.
In getting ready for this, man, I was listening to what is that Sun Ra record where he's talking? It's all like sort of, it's got to be from the mid '80s or early '80s, but it's sort of Cold War response type of stuff. But it's all this like, it's called like nuclear war.
That sounds right. Yeah,
and he's just like,
he's got so much stuff.
It's good, and the whole chant is just sort of like, what is it? It's like it's just gonna.
I love the chanting.
You're gonna lose your ass. This whole thing.
It's fantastic. I found out about Sun Ra when I was in college. There used to be a show. You can find a bunch of these on YouTube now. There used to be a show called Night Music that was on late at night.
Great.
On I think it might have been on public TV, but I think it might have been on like NBC or something. But it was on at like 1 a.m. on Saturdays or something. And all of a sudden, I'm just coming home from a party or whatever and flip the TV on, and here's this crazy shit going on. All these guys are in costume. All this stuff is happening. And I was just like, what the hell is this? And and you can see the orchestra still tours. Sun Ra has been gone for a while, but the orchestra, this is how amazing and how sustainable that project was. It's, decades after Sun Ra's death, and the band's still going. So so if people are interested, you can still, sort of experience what this is. It's still insanely weird. I've seen the orchestra without Sun Ra, and it's very bizarre. So I highly recommend it.
All right, well that wraps it up. So well done. We got it done a little bit shorter amount of time than last time.
Yeah, it seems like we got like one minute less than last time. We're trying for about 19 minutes less, but we'll get there.
Yeah, it's tough. This feels pretty good and pretty much like what it takes to do it. But anyway, so thanks everybody for watching and listening, and we're gonna ask you to do the things where you subscribe and click on stuff and all that. But again, we've been trying to get the word out because we've just sort of been in these other platforms and in the audio only world. And so for us to now be sort of starting on YouTube is what an uphill climb that is. So we appreciate anybody who can chip in and click on things or whatever.
That's right.
So click on the things, do the things.
And be sure to join us this Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central, when our special guest for our regular Art Fight podcast, long 1-hour interview, will be the great artist Wayne White. So we'll be Wayne White, who is just did a music video project that we'll be talking about with him. But he was also the design genius behind a little place called Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse.
Yeah. And did a lot of iconic imagery. I can't wait.
Yeah.
And also a Tennessee native.
Didn't he do the Peter Gabriel Sledgehammer video?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. So yeah, definitely an artist, and yeah, like you say, a Tennessee native. He just actually had a gallery show in town a few months ago. So we'll have plenty to talk to him about.
Right on. All right. Well, appreciate it, everyone. And we are out.